Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Akshay, and good evening to everyone who is here.
Thank you so much for taking out time for today's session, sir. And I will hand it over and I'll hand it over to Astha. Astha, please go with the welcome address and then sir may start.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Lecture 19 of the certificate course titled An Introduction to Disability Research, a Legal and Social Studies Perspective. This course has been jointly organized by CDRT, Kirorimal College, and NCPEDP. It is my privilege to welcome Professor Gaurav Raheja for today's session. Professor Raheja is a professor of architecture at IIT Roorkee. He's a design thinker and a well-known universal design, accessibility, and social inclusion expert. He is currently the head of Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee, and also a professor in charge of Inclusion and Accessibility Services at IIT Roorkee. We're all looking forward to today's lecture, which will be about reasonable accommodation versus universal design. I'd now like to hand over the mic to you, sir.
Thank you, Astha. Thank you, Akshay. Thank you to everyone who has been here. But before I go forward, let me ask you all, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
sir.
Okay, fine. So I think, friends, thank you so much for that humble introduction. Before I really start, I should first start with an apology because I know I am delayed by 15 minutes because I was actually in another meeting which I myself had to chair, was on accessibility only and was in a national context. So things went a little longer and I truly apologize that I had to keep you waiting for 15 minutes, right? Having said this and having tested your patience now, it's time for us to now actually move ahead and start this conversation. My second request is that I hope Manisha ji, who's doing the sign language interpreting for me, is comfortable with my speed of speech. Fine?
Yes, it's fine, sir.
So I will not try to speak too fast. And if I do so, please stop me. You have all rights to do so, right? Great. Now let me get started. It's sad that I have to talk to you online because talking about Delhi University, talking about this particular course, talking about the idea of reasonable accommodation, universal design, I think and I wish we had met live in physical offline mode to truly understand this, because we are all currently blessed, I believe, of living in the city of Delhi, the capital of our nation, from where we start every conversation of politics, and we also start the conversation of justice, isn't it? The point from where the nation is actually managed. And it is the same city where most of you, I believe, as I'm told, both NCPEDP and the Delhi University institution, I'm told Kirorimal College, are situated to host this event, right? So I think before we are going forward in our conversation, I would not wish to call this a lecture. I am wanting to talk to all of you and share some perspectives, insights, and stories. So you can already imagine that today evening, you can have your coffee and listen to me as if we are having a conversational session on the idea of universal design. Because I believe, I am told that some of you are students of law, some of you are students of social science, and some of you are working professionals, and so on and so forth. So the only introduction I can give for myself is that I consider we are all students of life, and life is the only teacher. So as we walk along this life, we are sharing perspectives. To any phenomena of life, हम रोज सांस लेते हैं, we all breathe every day. I don't know if there is anyone who cannot understand Hindi. Of course, I hope it does not make it complex for the sign language to change the medium from English to Hindi. But I thought if I can be bilingual, things can get better into some of us, right? So having said this, everything, friends, has various perspectives. The reason we talk about whatever legally, I am not a lawyer and I have no legal understanding of the world also. Yet, I consider that we are all citizens of a country, and there are two laws that are most critical for us. One is the law of the Constitution, and second is the law of the consciousness, which is my own law, right? And I believe there are overlaps between both these laws. While you can practice law in a particular court, create an argument, defend something about rights, privileges, responsibilities, justice will never come if by consciousness you are settled in the implementation of the law of your conscience. And this is something I did not say, Mahatma Gandhi said, that above the law of the land is the law of the consciousness. And therefore, he did not hesitate in breaking the laws of the British, right? I'm only bringing this perspective because I believe we are all in the boards of education. We are all well-meaning people here, and we have all gathered here to understand something which matters to life. My dear friends, young students, and people who are all gathered here, today we are talking about these two words, universal design, reasonable accommodation. But to complete the story of all this, I might have to talk about many more words to you. So with your permission, if you allow, I can now start sharing my screen as well and also scribble a bit on top of it, right? And the second thing is, I would wish, since I say this is not a lecture, this is a conversation. And conversations only get better if there are multiple views than just one view, right? So let me get started with a visual presentation for all of you. And I hope I get a chance to hear your views and interact with you as we move forward, right? So I'm sharing my screen. Can you see my screen, guys? Okay. Preeti gives me a thumbs up. Okay. So, okay, I have titled my talk as Universal Design Approach, a Beginning Towards Inclusion, right? This is not an end, this is just a beginning, friends. And I also have a purpose to tell you. You must have seen, okay, we are writing architecture, design, planning. You might be wondering, why are you sitting here? You are legal people, you are social scientists, you are whatever. So I would say no. It is rather more important for us who are sitting right now in the audience to do these things. And let me right in the beginning say, the world can become much better if people amongst you, from all of you, support this idea, only if you're convinced, because it's a matter of everyday life. It's a matter of every moment, wherever you are in the city, in this house, in the transportation, in any sector that you're interacting with. And let me take you through these perspectives as we move forward, right? I of course have a lot of slides. I can go on for 5 hours or even more because this is what I do every day. But I, of course, need to stop where you are saturated with my conversations, right? So, Akshayji, I give you the charge to please let me know when to stop. Though I know it was planned for 1.5 hours, but if people are tired before that, I have no hesitation to stop. Right? So, okay, let's get further. These are the two words, which to me are actually two worlds. But before we move forward, universal design, reasonable accommodation. the, the statement made in the beginning was, is there a versus? And I add to this statement is there a and? I add further to this is there a or? These are three different words and three different ways of thinking: legally, socially, culturally, economically. But before I move forward, can I raise this question for the audience that I have, as in what do they understand by these two words before we start the discussion? It is open to anyone and everyone. I can take two views from the audience randomly. You want me to call out names? Can I request Akshata Jaiprakash?
Yes, sir.
Your views on these two words, universal design and reasonable accommodation.
Okay. So when we say universal design, maybe what I understand is it is not inclusive in nature. We think about only the abled, the so-called abled, and we have been ignoring the people with disability. And reasonable accommodation is inclusive, because the way the social model itself says that when we give them the reasonable accommodation or the accessibility, people are not disabled at all. So that
Okay.
is the view.
So what you're saying is universal design means it is not inclusive and reasonable accommodation means it is inclusive.
That is my understanding, sir. I may be wrong.
No, that's perfectly okay. Thank you so much for sharing. Fine. So I think this works well. I pick up the names. Would Lavansh want to share his or her views?
Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, sir. I am Abhay. Sir, universal design refers to the things which is accessible for all. And when we call reasonable accommodation, it refers to means giving support or giving facilities to those persons who have some difficulties in doing daily life activities.
Okay.
That's my portion.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, for example, suppose that means I'm a visually impaired, so I'm living in the hostel where I am the only visually impaired. So
Okay.
sometime I need some support because here is not means hostel is not built on the universal design forum, means on the basis of universal design.
Where is
So
your
sometimes
in Delhi?
No, sir. I am in Banaras Hindu University,
Oh,
BHU.
you're in Banaras. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I am a research scholar.
Oh,
So yeah, yeah. So here 140 students are living with me, but I'm the only person here. So, but on the other side, I will tell you that I'm living with a person, means a non-disabled person.
mhm,
So it's a good social inclusion. But
mhm,
on the other side, when he said that you have to use, means he forced me to use a earphone every time, because when I'm reading with my laptop or with my phone, with the help of a screen reader, so it means disturb him in his study or in every time. So there, I need some support from the warden or from the administration, that yes, I need a single room or any more facilities.
right.
So that facility means refers to reasonable accommodation, if I'm not wrong. So
Fine. No, no, I think very nicely put and very nicely articulated. Thank you so much for sharing your views. Right. And thanks to Akshita also. We can take maybe one more. So would Lavansh want to share? Or anybody? I mean, I was generally just picking up names so that everybody is participating, but we are open, friends. Nobody?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
I'm Sandeep Kumar Pal from New Delhi.
Okay.
I'm agree with Abhay, but
Hmm.
add something. Universal design provide all uh, accommodations, but
Hmm.
whenever we talk about reasonable accommodation according to need and purpose of the candidate,
Hmm.
such as a person who have uh, hearing problem.
Hmm.
Uh, they have, according to them, yeah, according to him, a screen that is share all things about building and all things about that type of infrastructure, that is for him a reasonable accommodation. In an exam room, a person with visually impaired,
Hmm.
extra time is a reasonable accommodation,
Hmm.
I
Very
think so.
serious. So great. I think we've got beautiful views and beautiful sharings. Actually, we can just stick to this one slide and continue this talk for long. And this is a conversation that I expected also. Thank you so much, dear participants, for sharing your views. So my intent of asking you this was that, there is nobody who knows the best except for you, because what you know is what works for you, right? But it is an opportunity to enlarge the view that we already have, right? You can do that through various resources. And since I have got that opportunity to share my views with it, I thought, let me do it in a way, hopefully you will be able to understand and remember it for all longer time. One is, even before the question comes, what is universal design and what is reasonable accommodation? I would say even before we go into definitions, the idea is there will be interpretations. Number two is, why is it important? Why are we talking about it? What is the need to talk about it? How does it help? Whom does it help? So it generates lots of questions. And questioning and inquiring is perhaps one of the important parameters of learning. Why are we talking about it? What is the need? Because we want a certificate of this course? Because we were told we have to learn this? Because we have to pass an exam? Or because of whatever reason? Or is it just like, a tasteful evening? So we are learning about these two words. Well, the answer to all this is no. It is because it matters to all of us, right? It is not because it is a matter of law. It is not because it is a matter of design. It is not because it is a matter of personal choice, but this is something which we all should know, I believe, because only then we can provide both these things, either a design which is inclusive or an accommodation which is reasonable. If we ourselves do not know, how can we be reasonable in our conduct? I hope by now, at least all of us are clear that this accommodation does not stand for residential accommodation. Right? I'm making a small hut here. And this is what it is not. But this meaning of accommodation here is, it is an accommodation of life in a life context. Whether you are accepted in a system, whether you're accepted in a society, whether you're accepted in a building, whether you're accepted in a transportation, the idea of reasonable accommodation is valid for every aspect of life that we are living. So we are discussing these two words because these two words contain two worlds. Worlds meaning दो दुनिया हैं इन शब्दों में, right? And why is it so? So let's start a little more conversation about this. And the second aspect is when we use the word versus and or, I think I would like to be very, very careful about it. The moment we say it is versus, we are putting two words in a comparative mode, right? We want to say, okay, which one is better, which one is stronger, which one is weaker, like that. Versus, right? Chennai Super Kings versus Mumbai Indians. It's like that. When we say universal design and reasonable accommodation, we are bridging the two words, connecting the two words, right? And when we say universal design or reasonable accommodation, we are trying to say one of them, a choice. So the interpretation of all of them is going to be very, very distinct as we move in terms of understanding what each one of them implies in that given context, right? So now let me give you a little quick idea about what it is. And then of course we have a lot of slides to talk about as we move forward also, but I will be little quick in flipping through those slides, but the message should definitely be communicated, right? Now, universal design is, friends, is a theory, is an approach, is a process, is a method, and is basically a way of thinking which can be applied not just to the world of design, but to the world of technology, to the world of policy, to the world of legality, and to the world of developing any system or a structure of a society as well, right? Reasonable accommodation, on the other side, is a philosophy which is ingrained in a legal way and in a way that it defines a certain spirit of morality, right? Let me write this also for you. Universal design is an approach or a way of thinking which is applied. So it is an applied way, right? Reasonable accommodation is also, in that sense, is an approach, is a way, but it is guided by, the idea of morality. Morality meaning it tells us what we should do, how we should conduct ourselves, such that we are reasonable. Don't our parents tell us, if you fight with your brother or sister, please be reasonable in your conduct. Don't shout. Don't yell. Haven't our parents been accommodative with our behavior? Suppose you yell at your parents. Sometimes they can give you a tight slap, but sometimes they'll say, no, beta, please listen, please understand. So that becomes a behavior of reasonable accommodation also. The meaning to say here is reasonable accommodation is about a moral ground on which sometimes even law is based. Even before law comes morality, isn't it? So every law also needs to be a basis. And the basis is to create a just society, right? A just means where justice is given to all in an equitable manner. Now that is all. But both of these theories, universal design and reasonable accommodation, eventually reflect what? They are both ideals, right? They both reflect an ideal of life. And therefore, we will always say, you should design in a universal design way, and you should also consider reasonable accommodation as a way. And therefore, I believe we must avoid the idea of versus for the time being. We can reflect on it later as well. So let us today try and understand the perspective of universal design and reasonable accommodation, as in, why are we talking about it? We're talking about this because we believe all of us, no matter what discipline we study, should be able to first see the world from these lenses. And what happens when you start seeing the world from a particular lens? You know, of course, if you choose a yellow colored lens, the world will start looking yellow to you. If you start looking at the world, sunglasses, you will see the world in a little dark shade. And the purpose of education, the purpose of law, the purpose of anything that you learn is eventually to give you a lens through which you can choose to look at the world. And I hope only when you start looking at the world from a certain lens, you will realize that the world has so many gaps. And you can identify some of those gaps and you can start working in that area and actually fill those gaps. So we don't learn this because of the sake of learning, but we learn this because we can make a difference. And therefore, I thought, let me bring you to the philosophy of Tagore here. Tagore said many years ago, you know, even when this word universal design did not exist, even when reasonable accommodation did not exist as a law, he said that the problem is not how to wipe out all differences, but how to unite with all differences intact. Just imagine, no? Just even look at your own human body and see, we have so many different parts even within our own body. Just imagine if the head was somewhere in the middle instead of a stomach. Imagine if the stomach was placed above. All these are different parts. But how these different parts come together, that the human body becomes functional, isn't it? Imagine if the legs were up on the top and the head was on the down in the Shirsh Asan mode. And likewise, what happens is when you see the nature, we all see different colors of plants, different colors of flowers, and we see all of these are different things, right? The problem is not that we do not acknowledge the difference. The question is, how do we live with those differences together? And this is what Tagore said, and that's why we honor people like Tagore, who could see the world and have a vision of a world in a very inclusive way. What is the challenge that we today have as part of this course is in training all of you and the youth of this country. What difference can you make in making the country more inclusive, making the city more reasonable, making design more universal? And how do we talk about it? But before we talk about all that, we have to be first convinced that what we are doing is a good idea, is a great idea, and it matters in a good way to everyone, right? So such that between the people who have a disability and the people who do not have one, there is a difference of functional limitation, but that difference should not become a difference to wipe them out from the opportunities of everyday life. And that is what reasonable accommodation tries to tell us. That why did you do so? I ask you all these questions. Rather, some of you might have some disabilities and are part of an educational system. I'm sure it must have been a great struggle for you to reach where you have in the given context. So we salute your spirit of being able to reach here. But if we were to ask you, did you have experiences which you can say you were well included without any effort? Well, if that is not the story, it only means is we have a long way to go. And for that long way to go, universal design is the idea that guides us how to go about it, right? So today's talk, we are trying to look at following objectives. One is to understand the evolution of universal design as an idea, understand key principles, and reflect a little on the examples. But while we do that, I will quickly flip through some UN CRPD codes, perspectives, which I deliberately put in here, assuming that you're all from law and you know law better than me. But I thought I will only bring some international perspectives based on which the Indian laws have also aligned themselves to, right? So in order to simplify the word, I'm using the word is inclusion. Let me also clarify these three words that we are using now. So we have moved from two words to the third word. On one side, we said is universal design. On the other side, we are saying is reasonable accommodation. So let me tell you, this is a way or a theory or an approach. Reasonable accommodation is an idea of a moral principle, and inclusion is what? Inclusion is the end goal. Inclusion is the experience that we wish to create in the world that we live in. You can ask to yourself, is my home inclusive? Is my hostel inclusive? Is the society, are my friends inclusive? Is the restaurant inclusive? Is the public transportation inclusive? Is the street inclusive? अभय जी से पूछ सकते हैं क्या बनारस के घाट inclusive हैं या कोई और कहीं और से भी हैं, तो we can ask, we should ask this question to us. If it is not, or if it is, let us try and see it from four lenses. One is a lens of age. Does it include children? Does it include elderly in terms of age? Second is the lens of ability. Does it include people with diverse forms of abilities? Instead of using the word disabilities, diverse abilities we have. So somebody has acquired a certain challenge, functional limitations because of mobility, because of spinal disorder, because of vision impairment, because of hearing impairment, cognitive impairment, any form of challenges that we may have. The question is, does my society, does my environment, does my context? So I'm using three keywords here: society, which is also a social environment also as a built environment, and what did I say as a third thing? I forgot. Context, right. Thank you so much. So are all these things providing us a sense of inclusion? Is a question that we have to ask. The third lens, so I should make all of these as lenses, right? Does it look like a lens? Okay. So all we are discussing is various lenses. जब आप एक लेंस से देखने लगते हो तो आपको एक चीज मैग्निफाइड दिखती है. But it is important because all these lenses can actually happen in one person. I'll explain to you how. So when you see from the lens of gender, हम लोग अभी तक सब कुछ दो ही लेंस से देखते आए हैं. male and female, while we are aware that there is a third gender also, right? And of course, we also talk about the female gender because we believe that our cities, our systems have been in some way or the other lagging to include female gender in our civic society in various contexts, right? Whether it is about time as an axis to understand inclusion. So for example, would a female feel safe after 9 p.m. on streets of various cities in India? We have to ask this question, right? While the male are free to do so, they don't feel so insecure. And what about the third gender? So for example, is the third gender included in a school, in a classroom, in a college? Does anybody amongst us here have a third gender as part of your best friend, your classmate, your social mate, your neighbor? I'm not too sure about it, but I wish if that was happening, we would not have had to talk about what we are talking. Because inclusion is assumed to be a dimension of a progressive and a morally sound society, right? So since we talk about national development every day, it's important to understand that ultimately a nation is also experience of a society. It is not just about infrastructure. So it's very important that you cannot achieve inclusion. Suppose you make a very nice building, a very nice transport system, but if the people of that society and system do not allow you to enter in, what worth is that infrastructure? What worth is that system? So it is always going to be important and perhaps an ignored dimension of our discussion. Therefore, not just because you are social scientists or people of law, we are all citizens first. And I think therefore it's important for us to understand this lens, to understand why it matters. And the fourth lens, very important lens, especially in countries like India, is the lens of economics, which tells us the story of affordability. You make a thing, you make a product, you make a building system, and then you ask people, okay, please come, right? Who will come if he or she cannot afford? So what happens is, either in ignorance or by design, what is happening is many a times we tend to exclude a certain set of people on this in the systems that we actually create. So if this is a human that stands here, it is the same human who has a certain age. It is the same human, he or she has a gender. It is the same human who or she has a certain ability. And it is the same human who also has a certain degree of affordability. So all these four dimensions or lens that you are actually seeing are part of the same person. So the same person could be included or excluded, but sometimes it's too early for us to say, oh, you are excluded because of a disability. No, perhaps you were also excluded because of a gender. Or maybe you were excluded by virtue of your abilities or limitations, but you were excluded because of age. For example, have you traveled to a PVR cinema and had a cup of coffee and had a nice film with your family members? Try that on a wheelchair. Try that if you are vision impaired and just see what is the film experience for you. You will understand what I'm trying to say. In order to understand this further, let's therefore get a little into how the UN looks at this. The UN, I believe so, this must have already been covered with you. The CRPD, which is known as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So the word is rights, which came in 2006. And let's please understand is that the entire world is progressing on the idea of understanding inclusion, accommodation. Yes, Alok, you're saying something, Alok? Okay. No, in case she's sharing something, we would be happy to hear from her. Shall I continue then?
Yes, sir. Alokita, please put it in chat box if there is an issue with your internet. Sir, you may continue.
Okay, no problem, no problem, no problem. Right. So the UN CRPD, which came in 2006 as a protocol by the United Nations, and you must understand UN means all 200 plus countries of the world coming together on this idea that, okay, rights of persons with disabilities need to be defined, acknowledged, and this protocol, they say, was optional for countries to kind of accept it in the name of a principle which guides implementations and actions in those countries. So if you see this picture that is in front of you, I will narrate it as a picture in front of your screen. I am showing a world map which has three color indicators: a dark blue, a red, and a yellow. The blue portion of the world says that these are the countries which ratified the UN Convention. So there is one is part of the convention and the other part is the protocol. So the blue ones, India is one of those. While one of our neighbors, which is in red colored, you see, is Nepal, Africa, major countries, and South America. It ratified the convention and the protocol both. And then there is a yellow country, which is the United States of America, which only signed the convention. So there are 3, 4, these are all, I'm sure you understand more as a legal person. So there are countries which did not sign the UN convention. There are countries which signed the convention. There are countries which signed both the convention and the protocol. And there are countries which ratified the convention. And there are countries which ratified the convention and the protocol both. So it is basically the level of commitment, in simple words, on the idea that is being communicated through the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That would we as a country acknowledge and follow in spirit and implement the ideas that are part of it. And in order to do so, you can understand the statement that India adopted this convention in December 2006. Now, I want to take a few steps here to talk a little about what these protocols or this convention talks about. So this Article 9 of this convention talks that to enable persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully in all aspects of life. So please understand, it uses a word as life. And that's why we are talking about all this. We wouldn't be talking anything if it was not part of our life. What it says is to live independently. It means somebody is not living independently or not able to live independently. Somebody has been denied participation to life. And therefore, this article tries to provide a commitment that this must be done by all countries. Now, in order to do this, it also says ensure that persons with disabilities have the access on an equal basis with others to the physical environment, to transportation and information and communication, including the ICT, which is the information and communication technologies and systems, and to facilitate and services open or provided to public, both in urban and rural areas. So if you see this UN Act, it is highly inclusive in terms of its spirit of statements. Of course, we all understand and we know that on ground, the reality is very, very different. But then it is the youth like you who has to ask this question. Why is it so? So once you understand the nitty-gritties of these details, then we have to look at each of these elements in perspectives of each sector. Physical environment means everything that you see or experience on the ground. Your building, your rooms, your spaces, your steps, your staircases, your entrances, your lifts, everything. Transportation means moment you start moving, you are displacing yourself, whether it is movement from your home to buy a grocery, whether it is movement to go to your school or college, whether it is movement to go for tourism, whether it is movement to go for pilgrimage, by air, by train, by road, by foot, by ship, by jetties or whatever, whichever means of transportation that you choose, but it must ensure access. And likewise for information and communication technologies, whether it is a mobile phone, whether it is a computer, whether it is any other form of gadgets that you use, the question is, are they providing you support systems which enhance life's independence and allow us to participate in different aspects of life? And even if it is so, the question is it the same story in the rural areas of the country? If the answer is no, friends, you and me have a lot of work to do. If the answer is yes, we can stop the lecture here itself, right? Likewise, there is an Article 19. I will not go into details of all this, but I'm just flipping through it that if you have time, you should browse through this act and spend some time individually and together to reflect on that what are the provisions which have been given in these acts and how do they matter to us? And the third is, why are they not on the ground? Because unless we ask the question, we'll not find a way also. So the Article 19 says is living independently and being included in the community. To recognize the equal right of all persons with disabilities to live in community with choices equal to others, and ultimately ensuring what full inclusion and participation in community. So the UN Act uses these words: inclusion, participation, life, equitability, etc. And these are all the principles which are embedded in universal design also as a theory. Right? Issues of personal mobility, Article 20. Issues of education, Article 24. Article 25 talks about health. Article 27 talks about work and employment. So if you actually see all these articles that the UN talks about, it talks about various aspects of a human life. And in all of them, the expectation is accessibility must be provided. And it is the responsibility, I would say it is not the responsibility of one person or only the government. It is a collective responsibility to ensure that. So friends, if you are studying in institutions, your institution is able to provide certain means of access to people with disabilities. Certain others, I believe you also have a role to play. Are you an inclusive friend? Are you an inclusive neighbor? Are you an inclusive student? Before you ask a question, am I in an inclusive classroom? Inclusive classroom is not one which has step-free entry, wonderful furniture to sit and all, but inclusive classroom is one which has the experience of inclusion, both in physical, technological, digital, and social terms. And you and I play an important role there, even as common citizens of this space. So likewise, when you see the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals we all know about. Now, the important thing is that none of these goals exist in isolation. If you actually address goal number 1, which is about no poverty, which I already told you is the lens of economics, and if you have no poverty, I assume that people will at least not be hungry also. And if you also have no poverty, I believe good health will also become affordable. In fact, the first goal takes a lot of load on itself. And many a times, because of disability, people are poor. Why? Because the disability has not been given reasonable accommodation, because it was denied access to education. Because it was denied access to education, it got denial in work and employment. And because it was denied work and employment, it ultimately led to poverty. It ultimately led to more dependence. And who wants dependence? So it's very important, I believe, the youth amongst you will understand this and start thinking more about it. So, and it is a national issue, national problem. And therefore, I feel this talk is very relevant to all of us. Coming to the question now of India, what are we doing about it? So I know this slide is not very accessible, what I'm showing you, but what I'm trying to show you is that India started its journey somewhere in late 1980s, when the first Mental Health Act came. Parallelly, the Indian Road Congress was building its road standards. 1992, the Rehabilitation Council of India Act came into existence. And in 1995, the Persons with Disabilities Act came into existence, right? I believe the very fact this event is being organized by NCPEDP, the founder of which, Honorable Javed Abidi ji, was the man who was instrumental as a key activist in the formation of the first act in law, along with, I'm sure, his team and other members from the country. So it has been a journey, but we did not get it on day one. Let's understand that. So it has been a journey of almost a decade's work that you got the first act, the privilege of which some of us got, but the privilege of which many others are yet to get. But it was spearheaded such that the law guided many other actions on the ground. In 1998, we got the first guidelines for accessibility. 1999, the National Trust for Welfare of Persons with Autism, etc. was formed. So more disabilities got included, slowly, such that in 2006, for the first time, a national policy for persons with disabilities was formed. And in 2007, the UN Crpd Act came into existence. So if you see, coming to the point that in 2016, we got what is called as the Rights to the Persons with Disabilities Act, RPWD Act, which is an evolution almost like 20 years after the first act that we had. So you can see in legal terms in society, 20 years means, one person's at least working life is gone into that. So 20 years it took us to shift from the fact that in the earlier one, we acknowledged 7 types of disabilities. Now we acknowledge 21 types of disabilities. And we are not stopping yet. We have to move forward. The question is, through the legal systems, the attempt is to include as many people, as many beneficiaries, as many users, and as many diverse forms of human existence into the ambit of a governmental regulation and commitment that no, we have to provide accessibility, reasonable accommodation, and ultimately make sure that nobody is excluded from any form of life that can empower their independence, right? Coming to the universal design side, I'll quickly move into that as well. While universal design is an idea which started in 1985, I will come to that slide a little later. But in 2000, and it formed a beautiful idea because you have to understand how the disability rights movements were happening globally. Especially after the World War, many soldiers lost their limbs and other problems in their bodies. And when they returned to their countries, they become an unproductive workforce. So the European nations, the Western nations were very clear because they do not have enough population. They wanted everybody to contribute to national development. And for people with disabilities to contribute, it is not them that they can sit at home and contribute. they had to therefore make their systems accessible. And as a consequence, the West truly advanced itself in creating accessibility resources, accessibility laws, and things started taking shape on the ground, because that's also a perspective in the West that people are very, very highly, I must say these two words, integrity is very high, because what they say, then they do. And the second is the workmanship and quality is also very. I'll come to certain perspectives on how we have to look forward and take things forward. But telling you here, 2011, we coined this term called a new set of principles, which is called the Universal Design India Principles, which was launched in 2011. 2015, the Indian government launched what is called as the Accessible India campaign, the results of which are also visible to some extent, but it is very evident that the government supported these ideas and has been trying to push it down the line through people who matter to take it to the level of implementation. So these are some visuals of the Accessible India campaign, which divided the whole campaign of accessibility to provide reasonable accommodations in these three forms. One is the infrastructure or built environment. The second was the transportation. And the third was the ICT, which is the information and communication technologies, right? It did start, it did also take off in many projects, but maybe because everybody is not fully aware. So the awareness is still needed to be built around. And each of these sectors was further detailed in terms of what all needs to be done in them, and things happen. Likewise, you see the RPWD Act, which I'm sure has already been detailed out to you, which also had various sections to it, and especially the section 40, which says that the central government shall formulate rules, standards for accessibility, etc., in urban and rural contexts. It also says that appropriate governments shall take measures to provide facilities for persons with disabilities at various levels, in bus stops, in transportation, etc., and access to all modes of transport should conform to them wherever technically feasible and safe for persons with disabilities, economically viable without entailing major structural changes. And it also says it has to be accessible roads to address mobility necessary for persons with disabilities. Section 45 is a very critical section. It says, because this was said in 2016, all existing public buildings shall be made accessible in accordance with the rules formulated by the central government within a period not exceeding 5 years. Friends, it should actually be a moment for us to congratulate that 5 years are happening. The question is, have we reached the stage of inclusion? But also in the law, you see the other side, because most of you, I believe, might become law writers. So there is a provision which says, provided that the central government may grant extension of time to the states on a case-to-case basis for adherence to this provision, depending on their states of preparedness. So the law on one side is tough. On the other side, the law gives you the loophole, how to escape it. Now, this is where we have to therefore say is the law of consciousness. The responsible officer, the responsible government, how do they undertake this agenda in various things, and how do they prioritize accessibility and inclusion in various aspects of their existence, right? So before I move ahead, Akshay, it's already 7+. I hope I'm not holding anyone for too much of time.
No, sir, no, sir, not at all.
No. Are others alive and with me? I hope I've not put you guys to sleep.
Yeah, there, sir.
Not at all.
Okay, जाग रहे हैं बच्चे. Okay, great. So this is basically about the sections, and I am not wanting to look at them. Otherwise, I can go on each section and spend an hour to reflect upon it. But I'm just trying to give you is that the law is doing its job of making provisions which can be used only if the citizens are awakened, right? And only if the citizens are awakened, you can knock the doors of the agencies. You can ask in the environment, sir, this is the law. When are you going to make this accessible? This is the law, sir. The country has signed it. When are we going to have inclusion in this part of the environment? Be it a private agency, be it a government agency, the law promises that it is one for all. But it is important that as the youth, as the citizens of this country, we are able to actually talk about it in an open forum, because the law regulates lives for each one of us. Those of us who are able-bodied today must understand one single thing. We are all diverse human beings. We do not know what is going to happen in the next moment. I can slip in a bathroom. I can fall from the staircase. I can meet an accident. I can acquire COVID. I can have a terminal disease. I am all subject to multiple forms of life-changing scenarios. So please understand, disability is not an external phenomenon. Disability is not a matter of choice. Disability is a matter of life. It's a matter of diversity. And it's a matter which needs to be addressed with more inclusion than with more difference. And only in that spirit, we will be able to move forward for a progressive nation that we all aspire for. This is a simple image to give you an example of what inclusion means and what it is not. For example, there's one example is if you're studying in your college and your college does not allow any child with any disability to come in. Come in means it may have, suppose, a ramp and it may have an elevator, but if in the classroom you cannot reach, if you cannot study in totality, it's like calling a guest to your home, but restricting his or her access and saying, okay, you can come to my home, I will give you nice coffee, but I will not let you use the toilet because your wheelchair cannot enter the toilet, is an example of exclusion. Segregation. What happens when you say, okay, friends, everyone walk in from here, but for people with disabilities, I say, no. There is a back entry, please come from there, is an example of segregation. Integration. Like in Delhi Metro, you have a coach for females, you have a designated spot for people with disabilities, and you say, okay, you all can be put together, but in the larger system, here is a level of integration. But inclusion is really very idealistic. Inclusion means no questions asked. Everywhere, anywhere, anyone and everyone can go, right? So these are 4 levels of stages of inclusion. And I believe we all know we have a long way to go. If I have to enjoy the Aarti on the ghats of Banaras, can I go and enjoy that? Can I take a dip in the holy waters, no matter who I am? If that access is provided, you can consider ghats to be inclusive. If the temples have steps and they allow you to move in with no matter what disability it is, you can already consider them as inclusive. But if not, we have to decide at what level it matters. If you have to go shopping with your dear friends, you have to go for a film, you have to go for recreation, tourism, transportation, education, work, anything. It matters in everyday life. And you have to see, first of all, from which lens are you actually trying to see this? So my whole objective of this conversation with you friends is that we start first of all realizing that inclusion is not a subject for special people to learn about. It is not a subject of people with disabilities. It's a subject for everyone, no matter how intellectual we are, how intellectually sound we are not, but to reflect. And everyday reflection can only make this society better. So even if you don't contribute on it by a professional pedestal or a stage, it is very important that you can contribute individually to the understanding of this. As we move forward, therefore, it's my duty to now inform you, one word that we use as environment is a very large word, friends. And this environment means the physical environment, the social environment, and the institutional environment. Before I'm going to explain universal design to you, it's important because UD matters at an environment level. The physical environment is anything that you can sense by touch and hold it and do whatever. The social is the framework of the society and the culture. The institution is the laws that operate behind it. For example, the traffic laws are the institution of the traffic police. But the society, how people walk. So for example, let me give you a different example. Streets become unsafe for women after a certain period of time in some cities of India. Now, why does it happen? So it means is they are excluded. Why? Because on one side, the social behavior becomes a challenge, right? On the other side, are institutions which are supposed to protect are something that you don't want to risk with. So you may have police, you may have traffic police, etc. But you don't know at the time of need whether that institution will be available to you or not. On the third side is the physicality of the infrastructure. If the infrastructure is convenient, if the infrastructure is not dark, you have sufficient lighting, if the maps and locations are quite easily available, etc. So it's not that a street is unsafe or is exclusive because of one reason, but it is because of a complex interaction between the environments. And here, if you have to talk about universal design and reasonable accommodation, it is what I'm trying to say is most often what happens is we do only one thing. We do, okay, let's put few street lights and announce it as a good project, that there are so many street lights, so the streets have become safe. No, we have not taken any action at social level, and we have not taken any action at institutional level. So the streets are still going to be partially attended and this way. So for example, now, can I move on my wheelchair across the entire city? You can test for yourself. Most often the answer would be a no. The question is now to resolve the problem. Why is it so? Do we not know how to make a wheel-friendly city? I think we know that. The problem is not in the knowledge, but there are other two problems here. In New Delhi, there was an attempt during Commonwealth Games to make few streets with new design systems, which was called as the bus rapid transit system, which had low curbs, which had very nice walkways, etc. It segregated pedestrians, vehicles, buses with everyone. But what happened? The traffic density was so high that the places which were meant for pedestrians or wheelchairs, the motorcyclists started using that because the social behavior could not be controlled. How much penalty and fine would you make? You say, oh, you will pay 100 rupees, you will pay 500 rupees, etc. So that was too less a crime, and that is an institutional sector. You cannot charge 5 lakh rupees in India for making one crime because the law book says, no, you should be able to pay that amount. Huh? So our penalty systems for faulty these things, ultimately, you know the fate of that 1,000 crores of thing that was done. The new government had to finally dismantle it. And I think what we know is it required few more crores to dismantle the design that we had done as universal design. Now, this is where the problem is, and that is why it matters. Because in any design, when we say, who is it designed for? We have to understand this win-it model. I don't want you to get bugged up with this, but a simple thing I am trying to say here is, there is a total population of a country or a city, and there is a target population which you meet through design. So when you design any system, you always design that who is it meant for, and whether are you able to achieve it in a meaningful way this way. So most institutions are designed assuming that everybody is fit and able-bodied. But moment a person comes on a wheelchair, moment a person comes with white cane, moment a person comes with hearing impairment, our system gets into questions that, oh, we did not imagine that such people could also come for education. Till date, it is still a difficult scenario. Reasonable accommodation, friends, is not a nice word. Reasonable accommodation is a need. Just imagine, and that's the empathy, that's the morality the law tells us to use every day. The law is also very kind. On one side, the law is very tough, but on the other side, the law is also very kind because it is appealing to the society. Please be reasonably accommodative, because after all, the law is also for the citizens. But the problem I'm trying to say is the world's problems will not be solved by law or by fighting in the courts of law. Problems can only be solved if the society comes together in an inclusive way. And therefore, our behaviors, our responses, our accommodation to the rest of the world is very important. And those initiatives, I believe, even if a bunch of you would perhaps take in your future lives, you can actually be a contributor to the idea of inclusive society. Now, please allow me to skip few slides and actually come to the point which I want to share now. Therefore, with you guys, I'm showing you a picture of a gentleman smiling, sitting on a wheelchair. His name was Ronald Mays, popularly known as Ron Mays, whom we attribute as the father of this term called universal design. Please understand, the world till the late 1970s and early 80s was using a term called barrier-free design, barrier-free environment, which it acknowledged that barriers are existing in this world. And the idea of making the world better for people with disabilities in terms of accessibility was to remove those barriers. But Ron questioned that approach after so many years. He was an architect on a wheelchair and seems to be a very optimistic gentleman. He asked this question that why such a negative term? And that is where he says, because when you design for people with disabilities, you are always talking about doing something separate. At the moment you talk about doing something separate, nobody wants to do it because it means an extra effort, it means an extra cost, it means anything extra aesthetics. So if you have designed a building and you say, oh, I forgot to widen the door for a toilet, it cannot be widened later. Oh, I designed something very nice. I had some 10 steps to climb in this 5-star hotel. And then I realized, oh my God, a VIP guest who's coming to my hotel is on wheelchair and I have no way, but all I can have is 5-star caterers or 5-star waiters who lift my powered wheelchair into the hotel. Now, these understandings happened in the remaining world. India also has been going through it, but India had its own struggles and priorities. Nonetheless, the idea of universal design therefore appeared in late 80s of the 20th century. And what he said was to give the world a terminology with which we can talk in a positive language of inclusion. Because it is because of these elements of design, everybody can share the right of being together. We have so many instances that in Delhi Metro also, as an example, there have been so many elevators for taking you down to the platforms, right? Many of you might have used it. But I've also heard the complaints from persons with disabilities that many people who are able-bodied use the lifts, and they don't allow people with disabilities get in first. So they say, you can wait, let us go first and move up and down using that elevator. Now, the whole purpose of installation of those elevators was a reasonable accommodation in the principle of universal design, such that everyone could move together. But if we have citizens who deny that thing, then frankly speaking, we are also violating a law. We might not be punished because the law is not micromanaging our lives. But the fact is, if an elevator and two people sitting there wanting to use it and one needs it more, it is our duty, responsibility to ensure that the law is not violated. And it is not because the law is written by a government, but it is because that should be the law of humanity. So reasonable accommodation to me is an idea which is universal. And therefore I keep saying it's universal design and reasonable accommodation, or reasonable accommodation through universal design. So what is universal design? You can read many definitions on Google, and I'll also give you some, but universal design is basically a shift, a positive shift in the language of thinking of humanity, such that we can be more inclusive in our design approaches when we design systems, when we design policies, when we design products, when we design environments, and anything. Let me share with you one small interview which Ronald Mace appeared in the US. A quick response to this was when he said, he was asked a question by the journalist, what do you want to see for the future? So Ronald Mace replied, I think we are 10, maybe 20 years away from where we will not have to talk about this as something special. It takes a long time to change attitudes and practices. Now, Ronald Mace said this in late 90s, and today is 2022. So it's already like 20 years plus. And he imagined that maybe 10 years later, we will not even talk about universal design because it would have been incorporated everywhere. Though he said this in an American context. Now we are in India. We have to worry about our own selves, both in legislation, in social, socio-cultural, in economic, in technological, and in infrastructural sense of development. No society, and I personally believe, no society, no country, no city, and no form of humanity can consider itself as developed if it is exclusive in nature, right? You can go to the city of Mumbai. It coexists with the slums and with the high-rise apartments. Would you call this inclusive or exclusive? Friends, poverty is not a choice. Poverty is a consequence. It can be prevented, provided we come forward and talk about it. And disability is also a form of exclusion that happens as a consequence of our understanding. And therefore, we need to talk about now what we are talking. So the whole evolution of universal design happened globally in various forms. I'm skipping that, but it all started from 1950s as it moved forward, as I said. So various countries and nations also developed their own laws. Americans with Disability Act is one of the very popular ones. But you must see the law of the UK. They've given it a new title in 2010, which is called as the Equality Act. And the Norwegian government published that Norway is going to be universally designed by 2025. Let's see, we have 3 more years to go. And maybe some of us must travel to Norway to really understand what their mission and vision is. Right. Now, the other side of thing is, why are we talking about universal design? We are talking about universal design because if you consider this as lifespan, I've shown you in front of you is a is a graph, is a bell-shaped statistical curve, right? Which is called law of average. So we design most of the things for a human who is considered to be able-bodied, fit, and as a peak of life. But if you actually imagine life as a bell-shaped curve, you start very, very young as an infant. You don't know how to walk, then you are told how to speak, then you're showing how to respond to other reflexes. Then you become an adult in a certain period like college life and working life. And then again, we grow old. We again don't know how to walk, we slip, we fumble, we don't know how to eat. And finally, before we die, this is what is called as lifespan. Now just imagine any design that we do, if it is only designed for a lifespan of 20 years, which is my fittest period of life, would you consider that design as worth it? So if you're designing a car, if you're designing a public transportation or a bus, we all look for that. Everybody, would you not travel with your children, with your friends, with your juniors, with your younger sisters, brothers, and your grandparents? Now, if a member, if four as a family member travel together, like this here, as I'm showing you in the picture, an adult, a vision impaired person, persons with crutches, with baby prams, etc. The question is, can we all travel together? So if you go in the Indian Railways, you'll find there is a separate coach which says Viklang Vyaktiyon ke liye, Divyang Jano ke liye. Different terminologies have happened. I don't know if anybody amongst you is from Mumbai. Mumbai Railways has coaches in the local trains which have painted yellow colored and black typography is written on top of it for people suffering from cancer, for people with disabilities. And it is also saying if people violate the law, they will be prosecuted under the RPWD Act 2016 on the trains. Now, when I read all these things, I'm not against anything. I only see that everything around me is a mirror. It reflects who we are. It reflects how we move. It reflects how we behave. And I constantly keep wondering, therefore, that we need to be rethinking as a society, as a citizen, even before we think about design as a separate thing. And a collective society can make our environments more inclusive even before physical changes to design can happen. I will share a small example to this little later as we move towards the end of this conversation. So friends, if you look at it that way, human beings are not one typology. Human beings are of multiple types. And it is a natural phenomena that at different stages of life, they need assistance. To need assistance and to seek assistance is not a crime. The question is, who should provide that assistance? Because in some cases, assistance is given by humans. In some cases, assistance is given by technology. In some cases, assistance is given by economic means. So therefore, we have to talk at all three levels, whether it is policy, whether it is education, whether it is design, etc. And as we move forward, I'll just quickly therefore move towards this fact that these are the 5 levels at which we have seen the societies have progressed. One is a level when society, nobody knows anything about inclusion. The second is when people start talking about people with disabilities. Then they start migrating to the next level of terminology, they start using special needs. Fourth is a level when they start implementing the ideas of barrier-free, because a large part of our infrastructure is already built. You need to break barriers, but the most critical barrier is the social barrier. And I believe that barrier can only be broken by education, by conversation, and by doing certain workshops in the real world such that it can never be forgotten. And then comes is the stage which is called as a universally inclusive stage. And that is where I believe today these conversations shall lead us to. Right, so I am skipping this because I know it will take a long time. So what I'll come to here is, so what was the early definition of universal design? The early definition of universal design, which was given by Ron Mays, was it is a design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design, right? It talked very, very clearly. And it said for the greatest extent possible. It said all people. So please understand, universal design was never a design for people with disabilities, but it was an inclusive approach such that it could stretch like a rubber band. I think a very beautiful example would be a rubber band. It fits the one who wants to fit into it. It can shrink, it can enlarge. You can talk about elastics and rubber bands as great examples of how universal design can be accommodative depending on who you are. So therefore, it defined further itself into 7 principles. The 7 as 7 colors of a rainbow. The first one says is the design shall be simple and intuitive. Right? I'll quickly come to examples of all of them, but let me first just touch upon the terms. Second is equitable use. It should not discriminate anyone. Equity, right? Equal opportunity. The third is perceptible information, that regardless of who I am in terms of my literacy level, my level of perception, I should be able to perceive designs in an equal way. For all of this, I will give you one example as I move forward, and then I'll wrap up this talk, right? The fourth is the example of principle of tolerance for error. Does my design, does my system tolerate error? Right? And how does it compensate for it? We'll talk about that. Is a principle that UD talks about. Flexibility in use. Is my design flexible? Does it provide and accommodate a wide range of individual preferences? Low physical effort. Every design, why should it ask me to put so much effort? Can we have low effort and still manage with things? For example, low floor buses. You don't need to put your feet too high, and it helps everyone. Everybody rushes in metro systems, they run into it because you don't have to climb high. Size and space for approach and use, right? Which is the different body sizes can be responded through design. So what is that? The first one is equitable use. So when you go to an example is if you make an entrance of a grocery store, of a retail shop, which is free from any step, a wheelchair can also go in, your trolleys can also come out, and the design becomes equitable to everyone without asking any questions. Likewise, the example of level platform. So between the train and the platform, if there is no gap, everything is at same level, it doesn't ask you a question who you are, then you just walk in. It's a great example of equitability in everyday life. Second is flexibility in use. Have you checked your scissors in the home? Are they meant for you? Are you a right-handed person? Okay, great. Who knows if tomorrow you marry a left-handed person? So how will she manage or he manage? So do you have scissors which can be managed by both left-handed users or right-handed users? I'll give you an example of also furniture. I think I can draw here. Okay. So just imagine, I don't know if you have seen chairs like this in your classrooms. I'm drawing one chair for you. Maybe not as good as your college. So here is a kind of flap, right? I hope it looks like a chair only. And this flap is on the right-hand side. Have people with left-handed writing attempted to write on this flap? Because this flap moves up like this or comes down like that. So what is the answer to these problems? That our furniture is not inclusive many a times because it is biased towards an assumption that only right-handed people should use it. What about design of a steering wheel of a car? Doesn't matter whether you're left-handed, right-handed, it works, isn't it? So let's start. The purpose of understanding universal design is to see perspectives of abilities across various situations, right? And this is where you'll find flexibility in use is an important question. When your mother is sick, are you able to make food in the kitchen? So is your kitchen cutlery workable? My father is these days suffering from a neurological challenge and his hand shakes. So the question is, what kind of a spoon will allow him to have his soup or dal or anything without a shake? So there is a design intervention for this, but I know it's not easily available and it has a high cost to it. So can we design cutlery? Can we design systems around us such that everybody is flexibly available to everyone else and move with it? An interesting example of a universal design would be a chair or a table that you might have, which has height adjustability. And don't we see in cars these days, you have cars which can move up and down. The steering wheel also can move up and down. The chairs, maybe I should draw this computer chair, which I believe most of you in COVID times would have used, this hydraulic system on which the chair can actually lift up, the chair can actually move, and you also sit on this. Is a great example where the principle of flexibility in design is actually coming through, right? So likewise, Fiskars, scissors, etc. are an example. Third example of simple and intuitive use. I remember when I was buying a microwave oven some 15 years ago for my home with my elderly parents, I imagined that there are two kinds of microwaves. So one is a microwave which is digital. You have this one and nice screen and temperature. But I went for a not so modern one, and I bought the one which had round knobs, which would say less or more. You know, if you want to have high temperature, you turn it more right, and there's the mic. Why? Because I understood that the need was to make it more simple and intuitive. In a digital system, I need to put the temperature, which means it needs to have a certain level of intellect and an experience that I need to know how much temperature do I need to hit in. So different kinds of individuals may have different levels of intuitive responses. And what about if my house help has to use the microwave? She would not read a manual to operate it, and otherwise she will not use it. So how do you make design friendly in such a way that they're simplified? Frankly speaking, simple designs are liked by everyone. And no wonder that the whole journey of these iPhones has taken us to that experience. Though they're becoming increasingly complex in my personal opinion, but a simple thing to make a phone call is green is to make a call and red is to cut a call. And likewise, you'll find in many other designs this has happened. Perceptible information, which is about the user senses. So how do you communicate in sensory information? Look at your signage system. Look at how information is communicated about on any bus shelter. You have to go in your city, say from point A to point B. Imagine if you are a person with vision impairment, how does the system, the society, and the information design provide you a perceptible level of interface? And these are examples. So on this, the example is the Nanakuma line design in Fukuoka in Japan. I had the chance to visit this as well. So what they've done is, you know, when they designed this entire train system, for each station, they created a universal code. So even a person like me who did not know Japanese as a language could only associate with two things as sensory information. One was color and second was symbols. So in some stations, symbol was elephant, somewhere a fish, somewhere a flower, something like this. So even if I do not know the names of the stations, I would just make my thing, I have to go to the third station, fourth station. So design of sensory systems includes maps, signage, information, communication, speech to text, and other forms of technologies through which multi-sensory channels of humans can be addressed in a diverse way. And therefore, you have lifts today which have braille buttons. lifts which can have audio announcements, lifts which can have flash signs for hearing impaired, digital displays. For a lift to become inclusive, it must follow all these points. But the question is your lift accessible? Is your lift inclusive? You can go out and check on these parameters. The principle 5 is tolerance for error. Everybody, humans are designed for errors. But are errors designed to save humans? Most often not. If you lose a car out of control, you kill several people. Every day you read about it. If you slip from a staircase, you break your bones. If you slip in a washroom, you break your spine. If you cross a street in an accidental way, you meet an accident. So what the universal design principle is trying to communicate here is that to err is human, right? But your error should not give you a cost of life. You should not die because of that error, or you should not change your condition. So how do you design for it? Now that design requires understanding in the context where we are talking. So if you were to design a safe home, we can design that by understanding what tolerances for errors we can look at. See, these days, many of us go for tilings, right? We all say, oh, we want to make a nice showroom, everything is glossy tiles. That's a big blunder that many of us are doing. Because we want a flashy life, we want gloss in life, and that gloss sometimes is going to pay in terms of the slip accidents that we're going to have in life. Likewise, we are doing new technologies where tolerance for error is sometimes compromised. So for example, in the keyboard, you have a function called Control Z. If you type something wrong, you can always erase it. So it's a good design. But in some phones, what is happening is, especially I know in cases of elderly, these smartphones are not a very good option because they do not have a tactile sense as part of it. In fact, in many cases, I have seen your numbers get pressed by the ear in a smart, sensitive phone. So it does not tolerate the errors that are part of humans by virtue of how we use these phones, etc. So, but this is an important example to understand that we need to design such that errors can be tolerated within a certain limit, such that people don't have to suffer in terms of safety, right? So then is low physical effort. Every design, we all as humans are designed for low physical effort. Otherwise, we wouldn't have designed remote controls. What does a remote control do? If you have to switch off an AC at night, if you have to switch on a television, I think remote controls are a great reason of why we become obese. But then this low effort is one of the principles that's required for us to engage with any part of the system. But now, for example, in a legal system, in an educational system, if as a person with disability, you're asked to put in more effort, well, that's not reasonable accommodation. So the UD principles, if you see, like low physical effort, is a principle that guides towards reasonable accommodation as well, but it's important. So here is an example of a lever type handle. So many times you'll see on ATM doors, you have a door handle like this. Have you ever questioned why is the handle like that? It doesn't work, right? It's only good for pushing. But what we recommend therefore is a lever type handle such that anybody, even with less grips, can use it with an elbow. And it becomes a recommendation of design such that low effort can continue further. I think I've already taken too much time. We'll quickly close this. And the last example I want to give you here is about size and space for approach and use, which is about a small example is if you go by metro trains, there's a detail very commonly available. You have one of these AFCs, which is the automatic fare collection gates. One of them a little wider than the others. So this is wider not just for a person with wheelchair. If you have more luggage, you can also walk through it. If you have a baby pram, you can walk through it. If you're obese, you can walk through it, while others can also walk through it. So without a sense of being excluded, right? So the overall intent of everything is that we all have to coexist, and we are able to move forward in a way that that the spirit of inclusion is not compromised, right? I'll quickly now show you a few visuals just to give you an experience of some parts of the world, and we wrap up. We are already towards that. So it's going to next 5 minutes, and I will do that. So far, is there any question, any doubt, any quick reflection from your side? Okay. So I think move forward. A quick example is a trip trap chair, right? A chair that grows with you. This was designed by a designer called Peter Opsvik in Denmark. And you see there's a chair. As you grow, you can change the flap levels from one level to another, and it can put people of different heights in the same thing. A small dining table at 2 different heights, where of course is in the American context, may not work here, but 2 different heights for people with height adjustabilities. This is from the Frankfurt airport in Germany, an accessible washroom and a mirror, for example. You see this side of the mirror. This is an adjustable mirror. You can control the angles of the mirror through this device. This is a kind of pulley. So if you move it in this way or in this direction, the angle of the mirror, which is in section like this, can keep changing. So based on which the person who's actually on a wheelchair can adjust his posture or her posture around it. This is a sensor tab, so it's a hands-free tab, right? Likewise, there's a washroom which makes it more inclusive, is on which you have ample space. So you actually see universal design is an application here. The chairs can be kept on this side or that side. This swing bar can move up on this side or this side. So it provides lateral transfer from this side or that side. There is a red colored string that you see. This is an alarm, right? So you can pull the string if you are in need of any emergency or help. See the tissue rolls hanging as part of this design. So design is one of the ways to do it. You've seen a bathtub, maybe, I'm sure, but don't you think all of us need to jump into it? But with some age, if you have mobility challenges, what a beautiful design is this to make the bathtub accessible, and also put a shower tray in which you can sit here and enjoy the bath in the bathtub. This is an example of technologies from Japan, where actually they do not even use the word toilet, they call it washlet. So here it's a digital control for the use of WC, and you find it's also a hands-free system. The perceptible information of signage, again, a tactile system. Also, you'll find there is a toilet map outside it, so you know where you're going, etc. And this map is also in tactile form. What kind of a washroom would look from inside? This is how on the Narita airport at Tokyo it is. So there's a washroom with accessible urinal as well, and also the countertops of the basins. Accessible coaches of high-speed train, right? So this is the Shinkansen, which is known as the bullet train. But what is important is see the flooring, friends. So there is a tactile, which is a sensory level. Then there is a contrast in color. Then there is another yellow line, which is for the such that you don't fall on the tracks, because a lot of people have low vision, low sight, right? So, and this is the lowest level with the platform, so that you can wheel into the train directly, and likewise for a person with vision impairment also. And I felt so nice about Japan that they valued their culture. So inclusion is not about adapting only a new culture, but also protecting your own. So they also have the Asian squat WCs, and they made that accessible by putting more grab rails around it, support around it. And this is in bullet train. So sometimes we think we are becoming modern by only making what we have Western. No, it's also about improvising your own culture. Likewise, you also have the Western one, right? This is all part of the bullet train. Likewise, signage systems and in the airports, the tactile systems of putting. So if you have these handrails on both sides, the braille plates which tell you where you're going, where is the staircase going, is going to be an interesting example for us. Likewise, choosing a baby changing station in a male washroom, because in India, sometimes we have considered it's only a female's job, and therefore we are very, very exclusive. Even train systems is from Germany, the platforms. So, they every 6 months, they change this map because on this particular station, on this particular platform, only these trains will come. So each train is well defined in advance. You can go anytime, and as per your time, this train is going to come, which direction, where is your coach. So these are like grids on the station. So where you can actually stand. So you're standing at A zone or B zone, depending upon where your coach is. So this kind of a communication system helps you move in a very inclusive way. So this is how the train looks like. This is how the Stuttgart station was a couple of years ago. And actually, if you see in technology, this third step that you see folds. It opens only when the train halts. So in order to make this more accessible, and of course, this is inside the train interiors, accessible spaces, signage, and like that, if you keep moving on. So towards the conclusion now, all I can say is that 1 out of every 7 people need better access, increased usability, and I believe everyone will benefit from what we are trying to do. So it's a quick example to show you, if you're watching a match, you have 3 different levels. The third person could be low in height or on wheelchair. So the true idea of equitability is when you are either able to provide them equal opportunity. And here you see the intervention is not a step or not too much of a design, but it's minimizing design also by providing a new way of looking at the whole match. So universal access is ultimately a tool to provide reasonable accommodation. Reasonable accommodation is the basis for universal design. And therefore, these 2 words, I believe, actually have 2 worlds. And ultimately, why is universal design important for us to converse about is because it makes sense to all of us and not just to one of us. So with those words, I thank you all for a very, very patient listening. And I think I should pause here. And now I'm open to any comments, thoughts, reflections, questions, anything, so that we could now wrap up the evening session. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful lecture. It was very informative, and I'm sure we all benefited from it. I'd like to open the floor to questions. If anyone has any questions, please either type them in the chat box or raise your hand.
No questions. I think people have fallen asleep.
Do we have questions from anyone? I guess there are no questions, sir.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly okay. I'm fine with this situation, but wish you all the best, because in an online world, I don't get to see who is there with us, but I hope it helps people and
It definitely does, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking out time on such a short notice and for such a wonderful lecture. I am sure about one thing, that people have understood everything clearly, even if they don't have any questions. So thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you so much then. Take care. Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. We will be having the last lecture of the certificate course tomorrow. The timings are 5:30 to 7 p.m. and the topic for the lecture is social inclusion for persons with disabilities. The resource person for tomorrow's lecture is Dr. Vaishali Kole. She is a professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. And since it would be the last lecture, it is my request to all of you and to those also who are not present here for today's lectures that please attend the lecture. And that's it. Thank you. See you guys tomorrow. Bye-bye. Thank you, Preeti ji. Thank you, Manisha ji. You guys have played a key role for this certificate course. Thank you so much.